You're listening to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, episode 184. Business consultant and overall vegan powerhouse Kathleen Gage is on the show today to discuss becoming vegan, thriving as a septuagenarian, and growing a vegan business.
Welcome to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast. Myth-busting and evidence-based advice to help you kick butt with your health and fitness on a vegan diet. Here's your host, Karina Inkster.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Karina, your go-to no BS vegan fitness and nutrition coach. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I am super excited to speak with a poster woman of active, vibrant aging. As I mentioned in the intro, she's a septuagenarian. And in case you didn't know, I did my master's degree in gerontology, specializing in health and aging. So after my resistance band workouts book came out a few years ago, my publisher wanted me to publish an edition specially for seniors. So Resistance Band Workouts for Seniors was published in 2022, and it features my mom, who's also a septuagenarian, as the exercise model. You can learn more about that book and my 4 other books at karinainkster.com/books. Welcoming to the show, Kathleen Gage, a seasoned business consultant with over 30 years of experience, a dedicated vegan, and a passionate advocate for compassionate living. Based in rural Oregon, Kathleen not only leads a thriving business, but also rescues animals, reflecting her deep commitment to health, animal welfare, and the environment. Certified in plant-based nutrition from eCornell, NLP, and as a plant-based ambassador, Kathleen initially went vegan for her health and now champions the lifestyle for both the animals and the planet. She brings a wealth of knowledge on how to align business success with ethical living. Kathleen's favorite vegan food is tofu, which is spoken as a true vegan, of course. Here's our discussion. Hi, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. Thanks for speaking with me today.
It is great to be here. I'm excited about this.
I am too. You have so many things happening for you. Holy crap, I don't even know where to start. But I think where I should start is your vegan story. How did you come to veganism? When was it? I know you started out for health reasons, but now it's so much more than that. And I want to talk about some of those things and how you've incorporated it into your business and you rescue animals. You're like a freaking vegan powerhouse at this point. But how did it start?
I have to tell you that I started rescuing animals long before I became vegan. And I was one of those very disconnected vegans where it's like, okay, I'm rescuing on the one hand and then eating on the other. I seriously didn't connect the dots. And so for me, it actually started when I was 64. That was 6 years ago. And I started for health reasons. I was getting inflammation. And like a lot of people, I was kind of buying into the myth that as I aged, certain things would happen. And yet I've been involved in fitness for a long time, where I actually was a bodybuilder in my 30s and I lifted weights in my 50s and in my 60s. And there was a part of me that was buying into the mythology that as we age, that we have to get frumpy, we have to lose our energy, yada, yada, yada. So when I started getting inflammation, I was doing a lot of running at the time, and I'm a very slow runner. I mean, people go, oh, you're a runner. It's like, yeah, I'm always the last one in at a marathon, trust me. And so anyway, I started doing some research, and from everything I was reading, it indicated that if I gave up dairy especially, but meat and dairy, any animal-based products, it would help with the inflammation. And I thought, okay, I'll give it 7 days. So thought 7 days, if I don't see a result, because it was like the miracle food. And after 2 days, the inflammation was gone. After 7 days, I had given up on diets, and I've been a yo-yo dieter all my life. And I decided I'm not going to diet. I'm just going to do it for the inflammation. I lost 5 pounds in 7 days without trying. And I thought, well, I'll give it another 7 days. This is still a test, and had nothing to do with veganism. And so after another 7 days, I was feeling better than I had in ages. I was sleeping well. I had more energy, and I lost another 5 pounds. After about 3 months, I dropped 38 pounds. I was doing better in my running than I had been. I didn't have inflammation. And started researching a lot about the lifestyle. That's when I really hit the books, hit the blogs, hit the articles, hit the documentaries. And at about 6 months in, I was at the grocery store. And by that point, I had consumed hundreds of hours of information. And walking by the meat department, all of a sudden, I stopped in my tracks and I could feel the pain and suffering. And it was like in that moment, I have what I consider a spiritual awakening of like, oh my gosh, how could I have been so disconnected from my body, from my spirit, from the animals? And it was in that point that I said, I'm a vegan.
Hmm.
And everything I did moving forward had to do with being more of a vegan than it did having to do with plant based.
Interesting. Wow, that's powerful. So you did have a moment where you identified as vegan because it sounds like before that it was more a dietary protocol, it was a means to an end, it wasn't like an ethical standpoint.
Correct. You are correct. Even though I considered myself compassionate to animals, I really didn't connect the dots like most people that consume animals and they rescue animals because I do a lot within that community. And it always surprises me now that I know, why are we not aware of this? But I think if there was a blessing that came out of COVID, it was the fact that people started really hitting the internet looking for information on plant based eating, on eating healthy, on minimizing risk of COVID. And that's where the information about veganism really rose to the top.
So, did you have some reluctance around calling yourself vegan? I know there's a lot of baggage for a lot of folks, me included, with that term.
I did. I actually didn't want to be identified as a vegan because everything that I saw to do with veganism had to do with the people that threw red paint on fur coats, people that were really radical. And I thought, I don't want to be that radical. And yet, when I had that experience at the grocery store, it hit me in my heart and my soul. And when I did more research and I started meeting vegans, I realized that's the fringe because, I think in any community, whether it be the Republicans or Democrats, LGBTQ, different religious groups, the vegan movement, you always have the fringe. And then you have the people that are kind of like, okay, they're pretty normal. And other than the fact that we don't consume animals and we are looking to be compassionate to animals, I think most vegans are pretty normal in their everyday existence, if you will.
Hmm. That's an interesting way of putting it because a lot of folks actually make the decision not to use the term vegan because of some of those things and the associations, like you mentioned, the red paint throwing and all this kind of stuff. But then I feel like, using a term like plant based, it waters down the ethical piece of it.
It does. It's kind of like, okay, being in recovery. I've been sober for 40 years.
Wow, good for you.
And I identify as I am an alcoholic. And I know that. And I know if I take one drink, it's all over for me. I know that.
Hmm.
I ended up on the streets as a result of it. And there are some people who say, oh, you just abstained from alcohol. It's like, no, for this alcoholic, I know what I need to say.
Hmm.
And it's the same with being vegan that initially I just didn't want to call myself a vegan. But once I really came to terms with what it meant to be vegan, I changed the name of my business. My DBA will always be the same. I have my corporation that is Turning Point Inc., but I've had different names for my business based on where the business is at, and I've been in business 30 years. So I started with vegan visibility. And so that's kind of putting your stake in the ground, no pun
Hmm.
intended, but saying, okay, I am a vegan, I run a vegan business, I work with vegan businesses. So I kind of went from one extreme to the next. And, the fact that I'm in recovery for 40 years, that indicates that I do have a very addictive personality.
Hmm. Well, good for you. 40 years, 4 decades of being in recovery. That's amazing.
It's a long time. All it means is that I'm getting old.
Yeah, but not everyone has that privilege, though. So you're doing well.
You are correct. It's interesting you should say that I have that privilege. I was thinking about that the other day when I was on a walk, and I live in a beautiful area in Oregon. And I was thinking what a blessing it is that I actually have hit 70
Yes.
and that I am healthy at 70 and that I have a very abundant lifestyle at 70. I have animals that I adore. I've rescued them. And it's a privilege for us to get older. And for me, part of what my whole mission is showing that by example, that you can have a quality of life that is different than what we're being led to believe. You don't need all the
Hmm.
prescription drugs if
Hmm.
you choose certain lifestyle choices.
Yes, and I'd love to talk about that. But first, the animal rescue. Everyone listening to this is like, oh my God, Kathleen rescues animals. You're the best. So that started before you were vegan, you mentioned.
Yes.
What's the deal? Is this in your property? You're in a rural area in Oregon. So I assume that's where you do this.
Yes, I'm in an area that people tend to drop off animals, unfortunately, and at times, the animals that are dropped off are very abused. We had one dog that was, actually, she was the reason I got in the pet industry. I was doing a crowdfunding for her, and she had been a puppy mill dog for about 10
Oh,
years. She
oh
was
no.
used and abused. We thought we were gonna have to put her down, and it turns out that she actually had good blood work, and they said and she was a toy Shih Tzu and had not been fixed. So it was real evident what her life had been like. She was flat on one side. And I decided to do a crowdfunding for her. And I said, okay, I've created this product. If you donate to my crowdfunding, no matter what amount, I will give you this product. It was a digital product on, I don't know, how to do digital products or something. I don't even remember how to do a Kindle book because I've done digital marketing for 25 years. And I not only raised enough to get major surgeries for her, we had all the tumors removed on her belly, we had dental work, and I mean, several $1,000s. A woman in the pet industry, she actually found me and she said, "Hey, we'd like you to come and speak at this conference on how to make money on the internet." And I said, "Well, the pet industry isn't my industry." She goes, "Well, it may not be your industry, but you have something we want. You have the knowledge we want." And that little dog, Delaney, was my entree into the pet industry. And that's where I really had a shock when I went to my first conference and I saw people at a pet conference eating salmon, eating filet mignon, eating chicken. And I'm like, and I wasn't even vegan at the time. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense.
Not at all.
Somewhere I knew, and I think I was destined to become a vegan, but we actually have horses, we have chickens, we have a rooster, we did have a cat until about a month ago. He had to go over the Rainbow Bridge, and we have 2 dogs, and all of them are rescues.
That's brilliant. So how long has this been rescuing animals? It's well before you decided to change your diet.
I'm going to say probably about 20 years,
Amazing.
at least.
Amazing. Well, you're basically a vegan superhero at this point.
Well,
That's awesome.
that's a good kind of vegan to be.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So let's talk about some lifestyle choices. You mentioned you made it to 70. There's a lot of myths out there about what that is supposed to look like and what's involved. And honestly, I think a lot of what we're fed is bullshit, hence the name of the show. There's a lot of bullshit to bust.
I just got to say that the bullshit.
Yeah,
It is bullshit.
bullshit. Exactly. So tell me about this. You are absolutely crushing it. You've run a business for decades. You work with other vegan people, and I'd love to talk about that as well. So keep that on the table.
Okay.
But what are your go-to habits? What's your advice for people when it comes to healthy living?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that because every morning I have a protocol that I do, and it includes stretching and yoga. It includes walking. Sometimes it includes running. I actually broke my wrist a couple of years ago, freak accident, where they said you are so healthy that you should have had a much worse outcome than you did. And
Hmm.
it's like, well, I said, put in my chart, she's an amazing woman. And they thought I was joking. It's like, no, 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 you got to put that in there. So I start my day with meditation, with yoga, with journaling. I drink a lot of water. I think the big one for me now is the plant-based eating. But my foundation of spirituality started many, many, many years ago. And it really started with 12-step programs and realizing there are certain things I have no control over, but I do have control over how I view a circumstance. And the outcome is based really a lot on my attitude. So my really go-to has to do with making sure that I'm spiritually connected with the source that guides my life. That it works for me. If it doesn't work for other people, that's okay, but it does work for me. And physical movement is really important. I think that as we get older, a lot of times people buy into the fact that they can't move as much. There's days that I'll work in my garden for 5 hours straight. And, after 5 hours, it's like, okay, I'm done. We've got some acreage, so there's always something to do. But I think a lot of it is really checking in with my thought processes and who I surround myself with. Because one of the things I love to do is kind of observe what's being fed to people. And if people would watch TV from a different perspective, from really with a critical view, and notice how many commercials come on that are advertising prescription drugs, the one that gets me is, and this is on YouTube when I'm doing my yoga. First, you'll have a diaper commercial for a baby, and then there's a diaper commercial for people in their 30s. It's like, are you flipping kidding me? Come on. Come on. We can't do that. But people start buying into that. And if you see something enough, and you hear it over and over and over again, you start believing it. So there's a lot of things that people have subjected themselves to simply by virtue of the fact that they're not looking at things with a critical eye.
The critical eye. That's a huge piece of what we do here. I like that you
Ah,
mentioned
do
that.
tell. Do tell.
Well, critical eye means a lot of different things to different people, much like spirituality does. But in this case, we're talking about Looking at peer-reviewed evidence, looking at what works for each individual as well, because again, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to healthy living, habits, even being vegan. Everyone has their own process. But I'm interested in what you mean by critical thinking processes when it comes to these kind of things like healthy living and surrounding yourself with the right people and everything you just mentioned.
Well, one is to notice when you go into the grocery store how much processed food is there and ultra processed food. Because anything you do to, let's say you take a potato and you bake that potato, you've just processed the potato. But I'm talking about ultra processed foods and really doing your research about what goes into developing that food. Who's in bed with who? For example, big pharma with healthcare, with the food manufacturers. And a lot of people go, oh, that's conspiracy theory. It's like, no, it's not. If you go back and you look at things that our government has done that have put people at risk, their health at risk, one of the first things that I discovered, and I thought, oh, that couldn't be true, is the Tuscany tests. It was on low income African American men who had syphilis. And
Mm.
supposedly they gave treatment for it and they didn't. The government,
Mhm.
they were testing to see what the long-term impact of syphilis is. And it's like, are you flipping kidding me? And I thought this can't be true. And so that kind of took me down the rabbit hole of what have we been subjected to that we're not even aware of? And I think this whole thing with advertisers basically pushing drugs on us. I mean, these are legalized drug pushers. And I'm really adamant about that. And I find that the more I learn, the more I want to be a voice for that.
Mhm.
There's an excellent book by Dr. Casey Means called Good Energy, and she talks about ultra processed foods. There's another book called Ultra Processed People. I highly recommend people get it and do your research and then form your opinion. But don't just take things at face value, especially now with AI and with what's going on the internet. I read something recently that by the year 2025, year away, about 90% of the content you see online is going to be actually AI generated. Now, that doesn't mean that AI is necessarily creating it. It's a human behind it that's creating the product saying, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to give me in chat gpt an article on such and such, and it can be all made up information. People post it. There's a great example right now, Chase Bank. They're having a lot of problems because there was something on TikTok that if you deposited a check into your Chase Bank account, you could immediately get that money back and then close your account. People were doing that. Over 1 million people are going to
Oh
be,
my
they're going to
goodness.
have federal charges brought against them. It was like one person posted on TikTok and it just went crazy.
Mhm.
So I think people have to really look at when they see something or they hear something, do your research. Don't just take things even with what I'm saying right now, don't take it at face value. Do your research. Read the books I mentioned. Watch documentaries like Cowspiracy, Dominion, any What the Health, and really step back and say, huh, I'm curious. I wonder if that could be true.
I think curiosity is key, and the other thing is generally when someone says do your research, what we would do, I don't mean you specifically, but when we hear do your research, what that means to a lot of people is trying to find supporting evidence of what you already believe.
Opinion bias, I think that's what that's called, is like you've got an opinion, so you're gonna go out and find the information that supports it, and interestingly enough, the algorithms will feed you what
Exactly.
you already believe to be true, and you'll get more and more. That's why there's been such a divide in our country, and that's kind of frightening, how much people are divided on virtually any topic, and it's like, "Ooh, let's sit down and let's have rational conversations."
Well, that's a great point. And I feel like rational conversations often involve more gray areas than this yes or no dichotomy kind of thinking. So, for example, ultra processed foods. Yes, we all know that processing a potato by cooking it is technically a processed food, but ultra processed means a different thing. But even in that world, there's gray areas. I mean, protein powder is an ultra processed food,
Right.
but it helps athletes, right? So there's always little nuances. And there's actually some research that shows certain supposedly processed foods, like breakfast cereals, for example, not the super sugary ones, but just breakfast cereals in general, they're associated with better health outcomes. There's two sides. The one side is, yeah, okay, let's make sure we do our research. But the other side is, There's probably more gray areas.
You're correct, and I know that you've interviewed Jeff Palmer, I know you've interviewed Robert Cheek, and I know Jeff has what is it? Something greens.
Yeah, he's got, I forget what they're called. They're like an athletic greens.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called, athletic green. His greens are very pure, even though they're processed, they're still very pure,
Exactly.
where other protein mixes that you get can have egg, can have milk, and all of that in it. So,
Hmm.
one thing that people can do is actually read labels.
That's a good point.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Well, technically, red meat is not a processed food, but we know
We
that it
know.
has negative health effects.
Oh my gosh, when if you take it to the energetic level, when you think that you're putting all that pain and suffering into your body, and when people say, "Oh, the animal was humanely killed," it's like, what does that even mean? What is humanely killed? And less are we finding family farms. Most of them are factory farms by the big companies like Tyson and all that. And so, my encouragement to people as you consume anything, to think about what was the process for that item to end up, let's say, on your plate. So, if you eat some meat, really think it through and look at where did that meat come from? Even the workers, a lot of people say, well, how could anybody work in a factory farm? Oftentimes, they're as much victims as the animals are.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah.
There's a whole thing around human rights where people don't understand that sometimes that's the only job they can get to feed their family.
Hmm. I think that's often forgotten. It's the same in fitness in general. Like, oh, well, just work out then. But it's such a privileged approach. It's a privilege to be able to have time to do something like that. So I think it's the same kind of thing.
Absolutely. I had somebody the other day, they were complaining about something that was so minimal, and I was like, "Are they really complaining about this?" And I said, "Have you ever considered that that is actually a first world problem?" And they're like, "Oh, oh, okay." Because if you look at what's going on around the world, I mean, we are very privileged in many ways, and within our country,
Hmm.
there are those of us that do have a lot of privilege, and I think it's important to remember that because sometimes we take for granted that everybody has available to them what we have available, and it's not true. So I'm glad you brought that up.
For sure. I mean, it covers everything like food choices. There's food deserts out there, food availability options. I mean, we're coming from a place where we can choose what we put on our plate, and we do have the means to go out and get supplements and protein powder and whatever else. We're making those decisions for ourselves, but a lot of folks don't have that.
You are so correct. There's another really good documentary, They're Trying to Kill Us.
Mm,
I think John Lewis is the one of the producers. Phenomenal, phenomenal book. It's about, or a movie. It's about people in underserved communities, primarily people of color, and the lack of choice that many times they have because they're redlined, they're in food deserts. And if you don't know what a food desert is, I'm going to leave that hanging for people listening so you can go and research it and find out what that really means.
yeah, that's a great idea. People are going to be Googling right now.
People want the answer. It's like, no, you're not getting the answer. It is bullshit.
It is bullshit, exactly. So, Kathleen, tell me about vegan visibility. So, you have created a business that is very clearly catering to vegan folks, which is what we do as well. So, I keep getting questions from people about, like, how do you talk to clients about becoming vegan? And I'm like, they're already vegan. We never have this conversation. So, clearly, you're working with people who are already in that arena. But what do you do with vegan visibility?
Well, it's a marketing company. I am a marketing strategist. And right now, my big focus is actually on teaching people how to get on podcast shows, how to start podcast shows, and how to use that vehicle to get their message out to market. Because I find that's probably one of the best ways for people to get their message out. For example, with what we're doing here today, once the show goes live, I can promote this, I can do some social media around it, I can make sure that my community knows that I was on your show. So, what I'm doing is I'm spotlighting your podcast show. And what you're doing is you're spotlighting what I do. So that's what my big focus is right now. But I've had my business 30 years. I started out as a corporate trainer and I was a keynote speaker for many, many, many years. And when the pandemic hit and all the travel came to a standstill, I actually had reached a point. I'd been a professional speaker, and that's different than a public speaker. A professional speaker gets paid to speak.
Hmm.
And a lot of people are public speakers. Like I've done public speaking, but I also have gotten paid very well for doing keynotes and trainings and all that. But when the pandemic hit, by that point, it was about 26 years that I had been on the road. I was a road warrior. I worked for a seminar company for a period of time. And the day that I decided I had to stop was when I didn't even know what town I was in, what hotel I was in. I mean, I just was like from one location to another. And so I've done that. I've authored many books. I teach people how to market their books. But my big focus now, as I've evolved in my business, what I find my passion is podcasting.
Interesting. So I also see that you do like summits and online events and stuff. Is that around veganism? Is that around podcast shows? Is it kind of all of the things?
Yes, I have one coming up where I'm bringing a bunch of hosts onto my summit. I'd love to invite you.
Hmm.
And the hosts are going to basically say, what do you look for in a guest? What's a
Mm.
good guest? What's a bad guest?
Oh, I love that.
What are some of your horror stories? What are some of your success stories? And basically, it's going to be free to the public. And of course, there's going to be some back end stuff that goes on, but I'm going to have probably 21 experts, and we're going to teach people how to really shine on podcast shows. So, my big focus with that is yes, I do summits that have to do with podcasting, but I've also done summits that have to do with being a healthy vegan.
Mm.
And I usually do that with the clients I work with.
So is that the client running their own business and their own summit, or is it you partnering with another vegan business, or how does that look?
It is where I come in and I'll produce the summit for them, and it's their summit. They're the host, but we handle all the back end stuff.
Got it. Okay, that's cool. I might have to consider that as an option for KI Health and Fitness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to talk to you about that.
Amazing. So, how do most clients find you? For us, it's entirely SEO. It's all people Googling vegan fitness coach. We're on social media, but we don't really use it that much. We're just there to show people we're real humans, basically.
Right, right,
But
right.
what's the kind of lead generation for your business?
A lot of my lead generation is getting on podcast shows. It's also doing summits. It's referral business. I've gotten a lot of referral business doing master classes. I have a master class coming up on how to book lots of podcast shows. And so I've really niched down a lot. And so when people come to me, they already know what I do. So most of it is the fact that I've been doing what I've been doing for quite some time. And when I decided to go into the vegan space, kind of here's a tip for people looking to grow your business. I thought, okay, what's the strategy I would teach a client if they wanted to get really visible very shortly in a short period of time? And I thought, do a summit. So what I did is I had already been communicating with a few people out in the vegan space. And Katrina Fox was one. She has written a book on marketing and publicity. She's a media expert. She's out of the UK. And I reached out to her and I said, I'm thinking of doing this summit. Would you be one of my speakers? She's going, absolutely, Kathleen. So I had a yes from her. I went to somebody else and I said, well, Katrina's going to do it. Would you like to do it? They said yes. That
Mm-hmm.
I think only one person out of 15 turned me down. And I was like, okay. And I was the host. So I was the showcase with all of these other people who were being showcased. We were all marketing it. And within one summit, I went from total obscurity to all of a sudden, well, who's this Kathleen Gage? And then Kathleen Gage was all over the place
That's
within
amazing.
the circles I moved in.
Mm-hmm. Funny timing because we're thinking about doing our next online event. We did a big thing for my business's 10-year anniversary,
Mhm.
which was in 2021. So we're kind of thinking like, what's the next step? It was so much fun. We had a whole bunch of vegan fitness professionals like doing Q&As and doing presentations, and people were asking questions and they were very engaged. I did live workouts with people. It
Nice.
was so fun. So you got my wheels turning
So
about
what are
the
you going to do for your
options.
event?
I have no idea. Right now
Okay.
it's just like
Okay.
I want to do an event, but I don't know what.
Do you know a woman by the name of Angela Fischetti?
I don't think so. I'm
Okay,
not
I'll
sure.
introduce you to her, and then there's a couple. I'm drawing a blank on their name, and I'm going to blame that on age. But they're actually competing as a couple in a bodybuilding competition. They're both vegan. They're both
Oh,
very
cool.
clean in their veganism, and they don't use any drugs to build the muscle. And they've been showcasing and spotlighting what they've been doing for the last few months. And then Zach Belknap is his name,
Okay.
and his fiance.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the deal too, is if you niche yourself down further than just vegan, which is kind of how I feel we've done in our business, like 10 years ago, we were vegan coaches. Well, back then I was by myself. I didn't have a team at that point. So it was just this random vegan coach who does strength training.
Mhm.
And there weren't a lot of us. Robert Cheek was around, but he didn't coach people. He was just in the fitness sphere. But nowadays, you can niche within veganism. So now there's, like you said, the vegan bodybuilders, there's the vegan endurance coaches, there's the vegan bikini competition coaches, whatever. We kind of niched ourselves down into weight neutral, healthy aging,
Love it.
focusing on functional fitness and strength training within veganism.
Right, right.
So I feel like we're kind of lucky because right now there's a niche within a niche, and we didn't have that this whole time.
You're so correct on that, and that's what I'm doing with the podcasting because I actually recently I had been in business with a wonderful woman out of Atlanta for 2 years, and we both decided we had different goals. And she's very much into the details of strategy and a lot of
Mhm.
social media marketing and all that. And the direction she wanted to go and the direction I wanted to go, it wasn't working anymore. And so we had a great parting of the ways, and now we're referring business over to one another. But as I sat and I actually looked at it and I thought, okay, what do I want to do when I grow up? Basically, I asked myself because I'll probably be here till I'm in my 90s at the rate I'm going. But it was like, what do I really want to do? Do I want to retire? And I thought, even if I retire, I'll still be doing what I'm doing. And I looked at all the different experience I've had over 30 years, and I thought podcasting is the thing that gets me the most excited at this point in my life. And so it's exactly what you're saying. I've niched within a niche. So I am looking for people who want to get on vegan shows, who want to get on plant-based shows. But I think one area that needs to be talked about is the fact that, like, when I was first plant-based and I wouldn't call myself vegan, I was very, very disciplined in my eating. And then I started doing the vegan thing. And then I started saying, okay, well, that vegan corn dog is not a bad thing. And that vegan chip is not a bad thing. And all of a sudden I found myself getting into bad eating habits. So for this vegan, what I need to do is say, I am a whole food plant-based vegan. And it's like, okay, the labels, lots of labels, but it
Mhm.
works for me. Some people go, oh, you shouldn't label yourself. It's like, I do. I do.
Hey, the important thing of what you just said is it works for me.
Absolutely.
That's the important thing because it doesn't work for everybody, and we can all recognize that. I am a
Absolutely.
fitness coach. I am not a whole foods vegan because,
Okay.
okay,
Okay.
80% of the time, sure, but not all the time. I don't want to label myself that. But if
Right.
it works
Right.
for you or any
Right.
other individual, that's fine. That's the whole idea.
And more than anything, Karina, what I look at is I look at what doesn't work for me. And I know
Mhm.
there are certain foods I don't want to have in my house. I don't have any alcohol in my house for obvious reasons. And, some people say, well, just be stronger than that. And it's like knowing myself well enough to know that there's an old saying in recovery in 12-step programs, if you go to a barber shop long enough, you're going to end up getting a haircut. You might sit there and just wait and wait. Eventually, you're going to say, okay, give me a haircut.
That's great.
And so if you have temptation around, whatever that temptation may be, long enough, it's just like with the people you work with. If they don't go to the gym or they don't do what you recommend long enough, pretty soon they say, oh, what's the use? And
Exactly.
so it's really having structure in our life that gives us the quality. And I think that's really what it boils down to. What is the quality of life that we want?
Mhm. 100%. Also, like I always tell our clients, I think it's way more effective to outsmart our own brains, like not keeping alcohol in the house,
Mhm.
than it is to change how our brains work, which is what people tell you to do when they say, "Oh, just be stronger. Just,
Right,
just walk
right,
by it and
right,
say no." Like
right, right,
basically they're trying to tell you, "Well, Kathleen, change how your brain operates." Okay, maybe that's possible for like 0.05% of the
right.
population, but it's way easier to be a step ahead of yourself and just not have it in the house.
You are so correct. You are so correct. So I'm curious, how do you work with your clients? What would a client expect from you when they sign you on?
Well, that's a great question. We focus on strength training and the nutrition that supports the strength training.
Nice.
And everyone on our team, all the coaches are ethical vegans, super long term. So we only work with people who are interested in being on the plant-based spectrum. So not everyone is 100% vegan,
Okay.
but a lot of them are moving towards that and they want us as guides and, sidekicks in the process.
Right, right.
So, yeah, we're basically looking at workouts. We're programming everything that someone is doing in the gym, or if they're working out at home, here's your day 1, here's your day 2.
I love it.
And then we're creeping on them So every workout they do, we get a notification. Kathleen did day 1, and it took her 19 minutes.
You stalker, you.
We are creepers in the most positive
I
sense.
love it. I love it. Because you know what a lot of people don't realize is that when you eat really healthy through a plant-based diet, through a vegan diet, doing it the right way, that you do have the energy to work out more.
Well, you mentioned recovery and inflammation.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. And then there's type 3 diabetes now, which is the brain inflammation that is the result of so many people getting Alzheimer's and dementia and all
Mhm.
that. But the thing that I really look at is as I get older is that whole thing with resistance training.
Is huge.
And I feel very blessed that I started working out in my 30s and like heavy, heavy weights.
Well, you were
I
a
was a
bodybuilder, so
bodybuilder.
you're
I
way
was.
ahead of the game there.
I was. And, you know, it's like for me, I think when I broke my wrist, it was about 3 years ago, I had a really good recovery because and it was a freak accident. I got hit on the back of the head with one of those tents that they have at outdoor events. They
Oh,
didn't have it tied
yikes.
down. Gust of wind came up, hit me on the back of the head, and I literally face planted on the cement, and I could hear I just felt it. And
Oh,
it's like, "Oh,
man.
shoot." You know, it was really interesting to see the response from the medical people saying, "You're in a class all your own as far as how healthy you are, your bone." They did bone density, of course, and they go, "You
Of
have great
course.
bone density."
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
so a lot of people assumed it was my age initially. No, 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 no. And that's why with weight training, what I love about it is the whole thing with balance.
Yes.
Because when people break their hips, it's not necessarily that the hip needed to break. They had bad balance. They had bad grip, you know? So
Mhm.
here I am. Okay. So go see Karina to make sure that you
Hey, it's so great when people have a lifetime of movement, like, it adds up. I always talk about my Omi, my grandma on my mom's side. She's 98. She
Whoa,
strength trains multiple times a week. She swims every day in the summer. She lives independently. She'll be 100, no problem.
I love it.
But she's been doing this kinda stuff her whole life. She built a house herself back in the day, you know?
I love it.
But on the other side of the coin, though, also, it's never too late to start. So if you're 70 right now and you've never strength trained, there's a lot of research that shows you can actually gain bone density and muscle mass later in life.
I love that, and I'm glad you said that. There's a woman on TikTok that she's, 70-year-old bodybuilder, I think she calls herself. She had blonde hair, short blonde hair. I love her TikToks because she's showing and she shows every day her workout, and it's like, "Oh, thank goodness that people are putting that out there." That's the good side of social media when we can see people showcasing positive behaviors.
Yep. Well, on that note of social media and kind of going back into the business realm, as we're wrapping up here, do you have a tip or two for folks who are near the beginning of their business stage? Let's make it a vegan online business.
Okay.
So, podcast related, summit related, kind of general business tips for someone who's at the beginning stages?
Yes. The first thing that I would recommend, and I just put a video up today about this, is find a mentor, somebody that you can really trust. Do your due diligence. Don't just assume that what somebody is saying is true, but find somebody who's been there, done that. Another thing is really look at what market you want to work with within the vegan space. Because if you say anybody who's a vegan, and might not be true.
Hmm.
So really get clear on who you want to work with and who wants to work with you. And don't try to be all things to all people. Really look at if you're going to get on social media, pick 2 or 3 and really go deep into those. Don't try to be on every single outlet there is because that will not serve you. So pick the ones that you really feel like your market would be hanging out in. Like for me, it's LinkedIn, it's Twitter, and it's Facebook. And also I do some TikTok, but LinkedIn I find to be my best choice. So those would be my 3 tips. And also, treat your business like a business. If you want to have a business, you've got to treat it like a business. You should have at least a bookkeeper, possibly an accountant, pay your taxes. When I first started in the speaking industry, I remember the seasoned speakers who at the end of the year would have to come up with $50 to $100,000 in taxes. And they're like, oh,
Hmm.
shoot, it happened again. It's like, well, it happened last year. It's probably going to happen this year. And so really set yourself up so that you can go through the up times and the down times. In my business, 2008 was a downtime because of the real estate market, 9/11.
Yeah.
They stopped conferences, COVID. you have to have a financial backup plan, because if you have nothing that you can fall back on, some people say don't have a plan B. Well, a good plan B is to be able to pay your mortgage.
Yeah.
That is a good and put food on the table.
Generally a good plan,
Oh,
isn't it?
yeah, it's kind of a good one.
Well, this is where folks like you come in as mentors, as people in the space who have been here, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, basically. I think what you're offering specifically to vegan business owners is very much needed because a lot of people are amazing at what they do. They're great coaches, they're great bakers, they're great pottery artists, whatever it is they do, but they're not necessarily great marketers.
Right.
And that means maybe the business side of things needs a little bit of help.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm really glad you mentioned that, because so often people think that their passion alone is going to make their business grow,
Mhm.
and the reality is you have to do the footwork and keep doing the footwork, but have a plan behind what you're doing. May I give people my website?
100%. We'll have it in our show notes as well. But yeah,
Excellent. Veganvisibility.com. Real simple. Veganvisibility.com. Or they can key in my name, KathleenGage.com. It all goes to the same place.
brilliant.
And my focus right now is helping people to get visibility, because again, you can have the best product or service if people don't know you exist. And it's always interesting, Karina, how people say, well, I don't want to be so boastful. And
Mhm.
it's like, if you have something that could literally save people's lives, you owe it to them. Don't be so selfish, because being shy is as much ego as being boastful. So don't hide out. Be willing to put your message out there, but learn the right way to do it. And there's many, many road to the success.
That's such a great point. Wonderful, Kathleen. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I learned a lot.
Well, thank you. This has been delightful, and I love your show. It's bullshit.
Thanks so much, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Kathleen, thank you again for joining me on the show. So awesome to speak with you. Access our show notes at nobullshitvegan.com/184. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to the No Bullshit Vegan podcast at nobullshitvegan.com.